I would like to welcome both Bill Peare and Nick Henderson will be doing a little tag team here. Bill's going to come up first. And if you don't already know, there is a book out. I believe it's sold out, but they're doing another printing. So that will be available, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. I had the picture of it up here earlier. Okay, welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thanks.
Come on up here. Come.
Well, thanks for the invite. Oops, excuse me.
Sure. What happened here? Is it up there? Yeah. Okay.
State trooper chasing this guy for about 50 miles for speeding. Couldn't stop, couldn't get him stopped. Finally, he pulled over and he walked up and he says, "You're speeding." He said, "Yeah, I know." He says, "Why didn't you pull over?" He says, the cop says, "Well, did you give me an excuse I've never heard before, and I won't write this ticket because I'm just getting off duty." The guy says, "Well, about 10 years ago, a state trooper stole my wife. I thought you were bringing her back." One other one, the state trooper chasing this guy very high speed of 90 miles an hour, and he finally gets him stopped and pulled over, and he walks up to the guy and he says, "I've been waiting for you all day." And the guy says, "I got here as fast as I could." Well, thanks for the attendance. Thanks for inviting me to be here this evening. Have any of you, or did any of you attend the book presentation at Suncadia? Any? Good. You're saved. Because you're going to hear the same subject. I know Suncadia doesn't really fit into the historical aspects of the area yet, but 25 years from now, you will be proud to tell your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren how Suncadia almost didn't happen, because it almost didn't. And there's several reasons for it, and I will go into those as I make my presentation. But to begin with, we wrote the book because we want people to know the struggles that some people had to go through, including our company, to make Suncadia happen. There were so many events that could have caused it to stop. There were so many events that had they not begun, Suncadia wouldn't have happened. So we wrote the book for three reasons, basically. One, probably some ego involved. I will admit that part. I hope it was modest. Secondarily, most people don't know that Suncadia almost didn't happen and why it almost didn't happen. And third, I was driven by a comment of a friend of mine. Many of you know John Curley. And I called John, and we were just thinking about writing a book. And I said, "I'd like to have you write 2 or 3 paragraphs on you being kind of an outsider, what your views are of Suncadia." He said, "I'll get back to you." And he called me back and he said, "I got 2 problems. I says, "What's that?" And he says, "The first problem is I couldn't find anybody that liked you. And secondarily," he says, "the people I talked to says that's Suncadia, it's only for rich people. And all the money stays in Suncadia," which I will get to, but was shocking to me, frankly, when we did the research, or Mike did the research, on the millions of dollars generated by Suncadia into the upper county, the lower county, the city, and the state. But most important, and more important, was a contribution that the individual owners in Suncadia and Tumble Creek make to the communities. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's all volunteer. It's not driven by anything. So anyway, I'm getting off the subject. I want to tell you there are really two companies involved in Suncadia. And the first one is a company called Geldwen. Anybody heard of Geldwen? No, a few of you have. Good. Geldwen was a door and window manufacturer based in Klamath Falls, Oregon. And the reason I want to spend some time on Geldwen is because it was such a remarkable company. It was started in the early 60s by a fellow by the name of Dick Wendt. He and his partner bought an old, decrepit, bankrupt sawmill and turned it into the second largest door and window manufacturer in the world. So he was obviously quite an entrepreneur. Dick was an unusual individual. When I met Dick, he was about 75, and this is 25 years ago. He has since passed on, unfortunately, but big, tall, skinny guy, horn-rimmed glasses, played tennis 5 days a week, drove about an 8-year-old not a Grand Cherokee, a Cherokee, and it looked like it was 8 years old. His hiking buddies actually went in together to buy him a pair of hiking shoes, so when he went hiking, he wouldn't buy his old tennis shoes, wear his old tennis shoes. The Oregonian newspaper came out with an article in 1997 or 98 and said he was the 100 richest people in Oregon. Dick was worth $600 million. His wife says, can we at least enclose the carport? But that was Dick. Dick also very, very old school. When they go on the road, their sales crews, Dick would usually go with them. They had to share a room, two to a room. And they flipped coins to see who would have to sleep with Dick because he'd come at 5 in the morning to do his exercises. Phenomenal individual, as classy a guy as you'll ever meet in your life, and a good friend. And Dick was so community oriented, he started a bank to loan money to local businesses that needed short-term loans. It didn't work out well. They'd go to the bank and ask for money, and the bank would say, you do not fit the criteria. And they go to Dick and say, Dick, the bank won't loan me any money. Dick would call the bank, say, I'll guarantee the loan. Gerald Wen will guarantee the loan. And it worked. The reason I tell that part of the story is most of those businesses were not able to survive. So Dick ended up with not only a bank, he owned a car dealership, he owned a brick factory, he owned a title company, Merit Title, by the way, here in Cleellum. That was one of his things. He owned a dairy farm, and he owned Eagle Crest, a resort in Central Oregon. Some of you have probably been there. And that's how I met Gerald Wen, and that's how I met Dick Wen later. So I was doing consulting work for Eagle Crest, and they called one day and they said, we'd like to start a vacation company more attuned to how people vacation today versus a week of fixed time. You go there every year, da, da, da. So I met with them and a fellow by the name of Harold. And if I forget, you remind me to bring up Harold's name again later because it's significant. Harold was this guy that ran all of Gerald Wen's small companies. And so I went down and met with him. He said, we want to start this vacation company. And I said, well, how much are you willing to pay to start it up? Just $2 million. Done. I said, that's enough for me. So that's the introduction to Gerald Wen. Now, Trend West started, and we spent 6 months in the planning. And our concept was drive to locations where you go on your vacation and drive 3 or 4 hours, occasionally take an exotic vacation. And we were about, after that 6 months, we called Harold and said, okay, excuse me, we're ready for the $2 million. Harold says, well, I can only give you $300,000. I said, well, that'll buy a condo. Now remember, we're talking about multiple locations. You can go to all these condos all over. And so we took the $300,000. We bought a condominium in Otter Crest. We leased a condominium at Eagle Crest, and they loaned us a hotel room in Ashland, Oregon. That was our concept. And needless to say, it didn't work real well. We're about 5 months into selling, barely. And Harold calls and he says, yeah, I'd like to have you guys come down to meet Gerald Wen, because we had not met the principals at that point. Excuse me. So my chief financial officer and I drove down and we had dinner with Harold. He said, "Oh, by the way, I should mention, Joe Wynn doesn't know they own you," which was a bit of a surprise. So we go over to Joe Wynn's offices, very modest, I might mention, and Dick's there, and his son, Dick was the chairman of Joe Wynn by then. Rod was his president, and his nephew was a senior VP. And talk about three glum people. They're sitting around this table, we're sitting there, and Dick says, "Well," he says, "it's not going very well, is it?" And I said, "No, it's not at all." He said, "Well," he says, "is it going to turn around?" I said, "Nope." He said, "Well, what's it going to take to turn it around?" I said, $1 million. He says, "Done." That fast. I mean, boom, that fast. $1 million. We go back, we buy condominiums in Ocean Shore, Chelan, Leavenworth, Birch Bay, and it took off. It took off and actually ended up being the second largest vacation company in the world. Not bad, huh? So anyway, now we got money, we got sales, we're rolling along, and it's about 1996. I tell you the story about Trend West because Trend West is significant to obviously Suncadia. So it's about 1996, and we've got about 200,000 owners at that point, and we're in 6 states and Canada and Mexico. And our owners were extremely happy, so we were thinking to ourselves, what else can we sell? What other product can we tie into this? And we came up with a concept called the Residence Club, where they would purchase 4 weeks, and we did that at Ocean Shores, or excuse me, Seaside, Newport in Oregon, and Tahoe. Worked very well, but we're still struggling trying to figure out what else we're going to add. Any of you ever worked with a chief financial officer? No? Well, don't. CFOs run the companies. Presidents think they do. CFOs run the company because they got the money. And if you can't sell them on the idea, the last thing you need is going to your board of directors and having the CFO sitting there going like this, because it ain't going to work. So you got to sell them. So I came up with the idea, motorhomes would work. They could use their credits. They could pick up a motorhome, drive around the country. Another thing that they teach in business schools to CFOs is frown. Just don't smile. Just stare. That was my best class for my CFO, because he could stare. If he was staring, you were not going to get your money. So I go into Jeff and I say, "Hey, what do you think about maybe we buy a couple hundred motorhomes and they can stare?" Nothing. So when you get to stare, you might as well just leave because it ain't going to happen. So about 3 months later, there was a small cruise line in Seattle that came up for sale. Three cruise ships, 70 stateroom types, 140 people on them. Oh, what a great idea! Cruise to San Juan. So I go into Jeff, let's stare. So that ain't gonna work. Then here comes Plum Creek. Now Eagle Crest had been approached by Plum Creek about this property, 7,500 acres, and offered to partner with them to build a resort. And Eagle Crest turned them down. And the groundskeeper, the golf pro, and the original developer of Eagle Crest called me and said, "Hey, there's this piece of property in Cle Elum. You should look at it. It would make a great resort for Trend West." By now, let me back up just a minute. We're in Fiji, we're in Australia, we're in New Zealand. We got our hands full. I'll tell you about Harold later. Anyway, so I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go over and look at it." So we come over and look at it. And there's about 5 of them from Eagle Crest, and their general manager didn't know they were here. And said, "This is a beautiful piece of property. My God, and so close to Seattle. This is a slam dunk." But hell, we'll buy 640 acres and, put in a golf course and some condominiums. All those guys said, "No, no, you got to buy it all." I said, "Oh, hell no, we're not buying it all. That's $15 million. So anyway, we go back to Plum Creek and we offer to buy the 650. They said, "No, we'll only want to sell it all." So I said, "Okay." why don't we buy everything north of the river, 3,500 acres? That will make a great resort. So we go back to Plum Creek. Plum Creek says, no, not going to do it, all or nothing. So by this time, I've gone past my authority. So I go to the board and I say, it's $15 million, 750 acres, 7,500 acres, but there's $18 million worth of timber on it. We could break it into 5-acre parcels. If we can't get the permit, we'll still make money. So they agreed. So we go back to Seattle, and we were on a non-disclosure with Plum Creek until it closed. So we were sending attorneys over to buy up water rights. Our first consultant meeting, we brought in all these attorneys, land use planners, architects, ecologists. Oh God, there was 20 of them in the room. I walk in and I'm starting to add up the money, $100, $100, $300, $500. You know, you go around. And holy cow! This is costing us about $3,000 an hour. So we go around the room. How long is this going to take? What's it going to cost us? And the majority of them said 3 years, $25 million. And so I'm trying to figure out how to tie this into the story. Because it was we were on a non-disclosure, we couldn't talk about it to anybody. So we had gone down the street about a mile and bought and leased a planning center about the size of this room. And we called it called Project X for Mountain Star. So we're all over there, and a friend of mine comes into our corporate office and says, "Yeah, is Bill in?" He says, "No." He says, "Not here right now." He says, "Where's he at?" He says, "Oh, he's over at that planning center." He says, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "Well, that's Project X." Yes, what's Project X? Oh, they're buying this property from Plum Creek. Anyway, we got through it. So anyway, we start the planning. They said there's going to be 3 significant problems you're going to face. The major problem is water. You've got to have water. The secondly is the Yakima Indians. And the third is a group called the Ridge in Roslyn. And I'm not going to go there. Yes, I am. The Ridge Group cost us $5 to $10 million extra that we would never have had to pay had they not decided they'd sue us every time we got another permit. That's enough. No, don't say anymore. I wasn't going to say anything. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, so we sent attorneys over, as I told you, to buy water rights. And Mike Moyer was a senior VP with the company. His responsibility was getting the permitting done for the various resorts we were doing all over the country at the time. I went to Mike. He was senior VP. I said, "Mike, you're going to spend the next, I thought, 3 years in Cle Elum getting the permits for Suncadia," which was very exciting to him. He was a trained Jesuit who had taught Indian schools in Montana for several years. And it turned out he had taught the chairman of the Yakima Indians. Unbelievable. So consequently, the Indians worked with us very, very closely. We got all the water we needed, and then there was the Ridge Group. Anyway, we move forward. We're moving along. We hired probably the top land use attorney in the country, John Hempelman. And we hired Steve Lathrop, who probably some of you know. Between the two of them, if it hadn't been for the two of them, there wouldn't be a Suncadia today, I will tell you. And if you read the book, you will see why. He had to do so many machinations to make this work. He had to change the law. He had to convince the legislators to actually change the law where a resort could tie into city facilities. Even though we're willing to upgrade everything and pay for everything, we couldn't do it legally. So John and Steve pulled that one off. And if Mike Moyer hadn't hadn't had the persistence of an obnoxious Jesuit, I'm not sure we would have pulled it off either. Then the coup de grace, we're into this thing now, 6 years, and we're in at $85 million. My board of directors is, I can hear the pounding in the back lot where they're building the gallows to hang me. We were at our wit's end. I think we had another 6 months and we were done. One of the lobbyists, Steve Gano, said, let's go down and talk to the governor. I said, I don't think that'll do any good. He said, well, what do we got to lose? And all of you know, or most of you know, Bill Hinkle. He was a county commissioner at the time. And one of our attorneys, Mike and I, we went down to meet together. Anybody ever gone to the governor's office? Intimidating as hell, isn't it? 2 damn 7-foot state troopers just glare at you as you walk by. You smile and they don't. Anyway, Governor Locke, we sit down, we sent ahead a synopsis of where we were at and what had occurred through that time. Very, very gracious. One of the finest people I've met in a long time. In fact, we had him at our book presentation. Anyway, we go in to see the governor and we make our presentation, and the director of ecology was there. Our problem was getting the damn water rights transferred into a trust where we could use them up here versus where we bought them. We make our presentation. Gary looks at the governor, looks at the director of ecology and says, how fast can you get that water transferred? This is February. The director says, I think we can do it by June or July. The governor says, make it by March. I'm sick and tired of driving to Sun River with 2 screaming kids in the back seat. So anyway, that's our story. To sum it up, now let me tell you about Harold. Harold did us dirt. I mean, he not only lied to us, he lied to Joe Wynn. And he really put us under the bus to the point where we probably would not have made, well, we wouldn't have made it under normal circumstances. It's 10 years later, it's 96 or 96, I think. I get a call from Harold. He says, I'm in Fiji. And he says, I found this piece of property on the beach, and I think you guys should build a resort there. I don't know if I'll be able to tell that. Remember my chief financial officer? So anyway, I said, well, I'll get back to you. Well, I pulled the VPs, and it kind of made sense because we had Hawaii. We really wanted to get into Australia, and it was kind of in between. And so anyway, nobody agreed with it. I said, the hell with it, we're buying it anyhow. So we built a resort there. Harold supervised it. He called me, he said, I found this location in Australia. And so we fly to Australia, and he found 3 resorts in Australia and 1 in New Zealand. Well, all of a sudden, we got as much action going in the South Pacific as we do in the States. And so actually, Harold, unbelievably, ended up as the president of our subsidiary company of South Pacific Trend West. So he kind of exonerated himself long term. So let me sum up with this. I will tell you for a fact that Suncadia would not have happened. Oh, I should have said, I didn't cover that very well. To John Curley's comment on the money staying in Suncadia, we did all the research with the treasurer's office, with the chambers, et cetera, et cetera. Millions and millions and millions of dollars have flowed from Suncadia into the county and the state. Millions. I don't even know the number, and it's in the book, so you can look it up. Secondarily, the owners, the individual owners of houses, went together and developed a cooperative to put $1,000 a year in each, and that's all funneled into the upper county primarily. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars that they did voluntarily. I'm going to kick John Curley right in the ass, in the butt when I see him. But anyway, that said, let me leave it at this. I am totally convinced that Suncadia wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for the old man that yelled win, first of all, and saying, you bet you got $1 million, go for it. It wouldn't be for Trent West and our chief financial officer who did. I forgot to say he smiled when I went in and talked about Trent West, about Suncadia. He actually smiled and loved it. So, and if Mike Moyer hadn't come over here in his 6 years, we called him dripping water in the company because he could drive you absolutely crazy. Just drip, 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 drip until you agreed. And that's what he did over here for 6 years. He just drove people completely crazy. John Hempelman and Steve Lathrop. Without them, I don't think we would have ever got the legislation we needed to make this resort work. And it all goes to Governor Locke. I will praise I'll praise him till the day I die because he's the guy that Suncadia really is here because of. The last question, would we do it again had we known then what we do now? Hell no. Not a possibility. We were a public company. We had a fiduciary requirement to our employees, our shareholders, our communities. No company would have done it. No company, if they knew then what they knew now, would have done it. Not $85 million later with no escape. I talked about the timber you could take off of it and the 5-acre lot you could do. That would have generated maybe $40 million. Can you imagine a public company writing off $45 million and what their stock would have done? Not a possibility. Well, Nick's going to come up here and talk because he insisted on being last, so he can talk about what I lied about. Thank you.
You heard Peare's version. Let me tell you what really happened. Mike Moyer found me one day. I'd been in Alaska for 2 weeks. Came home. I was up at the Central Sundries, which is now the Roslyn grocery store, and leaning on the liquor bar. Dave Diverbliss brought Mike Moyer in, talked to us, and in those days I was selling advertising specialties, coffee cups and ink pens and calendars and all that stuff. And Dave Diverbliss says, Nick, I've got another meeting. Can you take Mike up and down the street and introduce him to some of the businesses? Yeah, I'm not doing anything. So away we went, and as we're going out the drugstore, I thought, man, this company's going to need a lot of coffee cups. I need to make sure they buy their coffee cups for me. They're going to need a lot of coffee cups. Never bought one coffee cup from me. Never bought a baseball cap from me. Think you might have bought some garbage sacks for the cars. That was about it. Yeah. Okay. So Bill can brag that he met Dick went and went to Dick's office. I can brag I'm the only guy up here that had Dick went call him directly at his office. My job was community relations, so I'm trying to get everybody supportive of this resort and what a good thing it's going to be. And I had talked to a lot of press over the years, and I had the Oregonian send up 2 guys, took them out on the property in this Jeep, and we're cruising around. We're going to build a hotel here. We're going to build this here, build that there. Never, ever, never, ever relax when you're with the press. I don't care if it's the Upper County Tribune. Don't relax with them. And I got relaxed, and the Oregonian said, what are you running into for support for opposition? I said, opposition is coming from the newcomers that got here, found their little bit of paradise and don't want anybody else. He said, well, what do you tell them? I said, well, if we were going to put a gate, we should have put a gate up 15 minutes before you got here. They printed that in the Oregonian. Dick Went reads the Oregonian. He called me at my office in Roslyn. Did you say this? I said, yes, I did. He goes, you know, you're not supposed to say that. And I said, yes, I know. you're not gonna say that again, are you? I said, no, I'm not. You know, that was my only time there. Ridge, Bill was polite with Ridge. We did come up with what Ridge stands for, because they've never put out, it's really an acronym, and it's Roslyn Idiots Detrimental to Growth in the Economy, is what it means. But no, you didn't. No, I did several times out in public. Oh yeah, they know. I do not get a Christmas card from Ellie Ballou or Doug Kilgore. But I don't think communists believe in Christmas. So
Oh, boy.
so anyway, that but I had the joy of showing people what we were building out there, going to meetings. I went one time with Mike Moyer and a couple of us went over and we're doing some lobbying for the horse parks. We thought that would be a good thing to have on the property, and we'd go down to this hotel below the Capitol and have a couple of nips and kind of debrief on what we thought how our meeting went, and we all agreed, oh, we had a good meeting, and Mike says, well, we really need to talk to Ralph Monroe. He was Secretary of State then. I said, well, what's he got to do with the horse park? His wife's on the Horse Park Foundation. I said, well, then we need to talk to Ralph Monroe because he's got a big stick. So we get back to Roslyn. Mike says, call him and put a meeting together. So I called him, put a meeting together, went into Mike's office, and Mike, the meeting is at 8 o'clock on whatever day in Olympia. Good, you go. I said, me? Yeah, you go. You talk to him. I said, I don't know him. Well, that's okay. I don't know him either. You go. So I go over and Bill talks about the governor's office being intimidating, Secretary of State's office just as intimidating. That's all. It's the whole state is there. The original Constitution is there. The original, see, all this stuff that makes us real is just on the coffee table. But Ralph Monroe and I talked the same language. And within about 5 minutes after the coffee was poured, we were both sons of bitching the people that are against the resort and how good the resort would be. And we became great friends, and he became a great supporter. And it just, it had to be one of the funnest jobs. Always, it was just building the support. One time I was with Mike in Yakima, and we were out in the West Valley. We were going to meet with Clallam's engineers, and Mike comes up to a stop sign, and he's in the left-hand turn lane, and he goes, I think my house is up that street. I said, oh, really? He goes, let's see if we can find it, and throws it in reverse and doesn't even look, just in reverse, backs up, gets in the right lane. I go, Jesus Christ, Mike, you got to look to see if anybody's behind us. No, they'll get out of the way. I come back, I tell Peare about it. Peare says, don't you know we got a policy, nobody rides with Moyer? You know? Well, nobody told me that. Oh, yeah, because we would come into Cleveland for a meeting. We'd come down past the Forest Service in City Park. We're doing 60. And I said, Mike, we're in town. You need to slow down. Oh, yeah. But we had some of the craziest times. When Bill was talking about sometimes the resort wasn't going to happen. One day we had a meeting in this planning center. And at one point, Bill had the idea to name the resort Wood Duck.
That is a lie.
Well, how come everybody knows it then? Wood Duck. So anyway, you know how you get the elf on the shelf at Christmas? We had wood ducks on the shelf. Every place. If there was something wide enough to set a wood duck, somebody set a wood duck. And in this conference center, we had 4 big cafeteria type tables pushed together. And somewhere along the line, Moyer found a stuffed mallard hen in some secondhand store. Remember that duck?
Yes, I still.
Do you? Oh, why? It's the poor kid. The neck is off. The feet are. I mean, it's a terrible mess. But anyway, it's sitting there, and I can't remember what got Bill excited, but he hit the table and says, "That's it." Looked at his brother, said, "Call so and so, tell him to sell the property. We're going to log it. We're going to sell it. That's it. The resort's over. We're done. We're not going to do this." Blah blah blah. And he's just flipping out. Moyer and his brother Rick got him calmed down. Moyer said, why don't we take 5? Everybody's been in here for a couple hours. Let's take 5. There's coffee over here. Let's get a cup of coffee, have a smoke, you know, because Bill had a sign on the door that said, jogging not allowed, smoking encouraged. So, remember that? So, so I don't know how we got this done with having so much fun. So we took 5, and I was smoking some Grenadier cigars at that time, and I pulled one out, and Mike says, "Can I have one?" Yeah, so I gave one to him, and he goes, "Hey, how about another one?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So I gave him a third one, and he grabbed that duck and he taped it to the duck's bill and shoved it out on the table, and looks at Bill and goes, "Jesus Christ, Perry, you even got the duck smoking today." But it was one of the best company I ever worked for, the best project. It was, and this is my backyard. I camped and rode bikes and rode horses back there and hunted and keg parties and which the keg parties were a little bit of a surprise to the anthropologists and the Yakimas, because they were showing us where their camps were, which is a big, deep, dark secret, and we won't tell anybody where the camps are. But there was a pit house that was used a lot as a campfire pit. they weren't real impressed with us that we had a campfire pit in one of their areas. But it was great. We had a couple of archaeologists that came up from Oregon that the Indians hired, we paid for. And the Indians think when you find an artifact, you've got to leave it right there and let it go back into the duff and back into the earth, and don't bring it to a museum or anything. But every time they'd find something, we'd lose a lot. Oh, now that's some hunting spot or something, and can't build anything there. So one day they came into the office and they had an obsidian skinning tool, which was just beautiful. So it was, besides being an Indian artifact, it was obsidian. We don't have obsidian around here, so that had to be traded or brought in by some other tribe than ours. And the thing was just perfect. You could hold it, and you could just see how you'd skin an animal. And I said, "No, that's not a skinning tool." "Oh, yeah. One of these archaeologists were really excited. And they said, "What do you think it is?" I said, "It's a skipping stone." "No, it's not. Look at," I said, "No, come on. Let's go." I shut my computer. Let's get in my car. I said, "We'll go up the lake." I said, "I bet I can skip this one all the way across the lake." "Oh, no, you can't." They wouldn't show me any other treasures. But it's a good project. I stand behind it. I stand behind Bill and Mike Moyer, and it was just a blast. It was an absolute blast. Took a little heat from the community, but that's okay. It was worth it. It was just fun. Let's do it again. What do you mean no? How can you say no?
I want to apologize. I did not mention that one of the main reasons that Suncadia did work is because of Nick. Because Mike was smart enough to hire Nick early on, and I normally say that in my presentation. He says he's always behind me. Well, he's usually way behind me when there's a planning session. So I took the heat. He sat in the back and giggled, and that was about the size. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Can you tell us about your book and the proceeds go to when it comes back, when it gets reprinted?
Let me tell you about the book. Have we got any time left? About 3 years ago, I had been running into people, including Curly, who was telling me all this crap about the money was staying in Suncadia and it's only for the rich. And I thought, I'm going to write a book. And I had written a book, but so I started writing it, and it didn't work. I don't know how to write, obviously. So I'm at a party at John Curley's, actually, and I'm talking to a retired Seattle police officer, and his wife walks up, and he says, "That's my wife. She owns a publishing company." "A publishing company? That's interesting." So I tell her what I'm thinking about doing, and she's right on the ball. So anyway, they call me home a couple days later, and they say, "Yes, we'd like to write this book, et cetera, et cetera. And we have several authors, and we have everything you need." I thought, man, this is right up my alley. So anyway, the end of the story, I'm not going to go through all the details. When they were done, that book was going to cost me over $100,000. And I thought, you know, I'm a gracious individual and I like to contribute, but I don't like that. So Mike Moyer had written 3 books. So I called him. Best move ever made, because he made a great book out of a very mediocre book. So anyway, in answer to your question, so Mike Moyer really gets all the credit for the book. He gave me a paragraph here and there, but that's about it. So anyway, when we're writing the book, I said, Mike, I want to donate all the money to somebody, and we went through a list, and somebody, I don't remember who it was now, said, you know, they have a fund at the school for young children that is used for like school lunches and winter coats and school supplies and emergency needs. So I called, is it JB, and he called, I left a message, he called me back, he says, I've never had anybody call offering money before. So we met, and then I met Marilyn Greenhaw, I think I said that right. She's a financial person for the school, and they did have a fund, and it was, they only had $400 in it. And the teachers and the counselors and others were always coming up with extra money for these, you know, these are little tiny kids. These are 6, 7, 8 years old. And so all the money goes to that, in answer to your question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. But speak up, I can't hear you. That's a great question. What is it? Suncadia. It's Suncadia, but there's a tagline. I can't remember what it is, but it's Suncadia. And we
There it is.
back to Moyer. Moyer says, well, how many should we order? I said, oh, we should order 500. Oh, hell, we'll never sell 500. I said, well, what do you think we should order? He said, I think we should order a couple hundred. And okay, let's order 400. They sold, they're gone. Every damn one is gone. And instead of paying such and such, now we got to pay more for the next 100. So anyway, we have another 100 coming in. Suncadia bought 100, by the way, and they want another 30, so they're sold out. Base Camp, I think, bought 50, and they're sold out, and they want additional. And the Tribune bought, I think, 35, and they're sold out. So we have another 100 online coming in early May.
So the question was, what was happening with all the different names? Because there was like Geldwin, there's Mountain Star, Trend West, Suncadia.
We were not good at coming up with names. The original name for Trend West was going to be International Resorts, and that didn't work because somebody used it. So we spent about 2 months, Moyer and Jeff Sykes and I, trying to come up with a name. We couldn't come up with one. And the name of Geldwin's subsidiary companies was Trend West Inc. So we called them and said, okay, we can't go to the name. How about we use Trend West Resorts? Okay, they got that. So now we're at Trend West Resorts. The next step is we called the club, which the owners owned, the members owned. We called it, the name of that clothing company? Huh? Oh, gosh, he doesn't know either. I'll tell you. Why do I tolerate? I can't think of the name of it, but we call, it was a clothing company. We had the name for the club. They sued us, and it was going to cost us about $250,000 to fight them. It was easier to change the name, which we changed to World Mark the Club, which I hate to this day. It was a dumb name, but anyway. So back to your question. When we were developing Suncadia, we hired the company that had done the revision on Trend West Resorts, which they'd done a phenomenal job. And they did all sorts, we had like 500 names. Then they ran a contest at Cle Elum for the name. And we were looking at that. We couldn't come up with a name. It was that simple. And we settled on Mountain Star because that was a prevalent name that came out of Cle Elum. When Lowe took over, they hated the name. And our logo at Worldmark was at Suncadia was the Stewart Mountains. That was, they took actually a picture of that, and that was the logo. And so when Lowe took over, they didn't think that Mountain Star was enough, didn't have enough class to it. So they changed the name to Suncadia, which I agree with, by the way. I think it's a great name.
Did it change ownership or did it just change name?
No, well, okay, one more story. Trend West in 2002 was a public company, very successful, and they were approached by a conglomerate out of New York to buy them. And we sold the company to them for $1 billion. Can you believe that? God dang, Jell Wen invested $1,300,000 and they got $1 billion. Anyway, that's why am I on that? Anyway, so when we sold the company to Sendon, they did not want the Suncadia property. They were a franchise company. They owned like Coldwell Banker, Avis Rent-A-Car, Ramada Inns, et cetera, et cetera. I tried to sell them on. I brought the chairman over, toured him on the property, said it was wonderful. He thought it was wonderful, but he says, we ain't doing it. So to make the deal work with Sendon, Jell Wen, who was the majority shareholder in Trend West, I know this is getting complicated, but Jell Wen owned 80% of Trend West. The rest was public. Jell Wen, to make the deal work, says, we'll buy Suncadia out of Trend West. So consequently, Trend West was a whole company without Suncadia. Then Jell Wen was going to run it. I was going to come over here as a GM, but I had to stay a year with Trend West. And I get a call from Jell Wen I was about 6 months into my 1-year purgatory. And I get a call from Jell Wen that says, yeah, we'd like to have you come down and visit. And we'll send a plane. Anytime Jell Wen sent a plane, you were screwed. You just didn't know how you were screwed. So I go down and they said, well, Bill, you know, we got $85 million invested in Suncadia. We'd like to bring in a partner and you can still be involved if you'd like. But no, I ain't waiting for nobody no more. They brought in Lowe Enterprises and they sold Lowe Enterprises 25% of the company. So Jell Wen ended up owning Suncadia with a 25% partner of Lowe's, and who owns it today. Lowe's is actually the managing partner today, because Jell Wen is, they don't have any ownership today.
It's Hyatt's connection.
Hmm?
What is Hyatt Corporation? Hotel?
Hyatt is a franchisee that comes in to run the hotel. Lowe's gave them the franchise rights to run the hotel. And I think the golf courses, don't they?
Yeah, and then Pearl Tree.
Yeah,
Pearl Tree.
yeah. No more questions? Thanks very much. It was fun. Appreciate it.
Great.